You don't realize how soft a Citroen is until a BMW, Audi, or Mercedes suddenly starts feeling harsh. But why does that happen? Is German luxury overrated, or did the French discover something everyone else forgot? This is why German cars feel harsh after driving a Citroen. You see, Germany and France never agreed on what comfort should actually feel like. They approached the same challenge with completely different philosophies. And that's why switching between them can feel so dramatic. And to understand why German cars feel firmer, I think we have to go back nearly a century. Germany's idea of comfort was shaped by the Autobahn. With cars regularly cruising at 80 to 100 miles per hour, stability became everything. At those speeds, excessive body movement can actually feel unsettling. That's why German engineers favor stiffer springs and tightly controlled damping. The goal is to make the car feel secure and predictable. BMW, for example, has always focused on driver involvement. I love how their steering communicates exactly what's happening beneath the tires. Mercedes takes a slightly different approach, combining luxury with impressive composure at speed. Audi sits somewhere in between, using clever engineering and quattro technology to make the car feel incredibly planted. But what changed my perspective on comfort completely is that for German brands, comfort isn't about erasing the road. It's about eliminating fatigue through stability and control. You still feel what's happening underneath you because they believe confidence comes from being connected to the tarmac. The French, however, saw the same problem and came to the exact opposite conclusion. And that's where Citroen's magic really begins. So, why did Citroen end up chasing comfort so differently from the Germans? The answer lies in post-war France. Back then, many roads outside cities were rough, broken, or not even properly paved. Families and farmers needed cars that could tackle these conditions without beating up everyone inside. And Citroen's engineers became obsessed with one simple idea: making passengers forget the road even existed. That obsession eventually became part of the brand's DNA. And then, in 1955, Citroën unveiled something that changed automotive history forever. The DS introduced the famous Hydropneumatic suspension, replacing conventional steel springs with nitrogen-filled spheres and hydraulic fluid. When the car encountered a bump, it didn't crash over it like most vehicles. Instead, it seemed to glide above it. What I love is that the system wasn't merely soft. It could level itself automatically, adapt to different loads, and maintain that famous floating sensation no matter the conditions. Later, cars like the CX, XM, and the magnificent C6 continued refining this philosophy. But comfort was only part of the story. The true test came in 1962, when an assassination attempt on Charles de Gaulle left a DS with all four tires blown out by gunfire. Somehow, the suspension kept the car stable enough to escape, creating one of the most famous moments in automotive history. Even modern Citroens haven't forgotten their roots. The C5 Aircross, for example, uses progressive hydraulic cushions, which soften impacts in a remarkably clever way. Rather than fighting the road, Citroën tried to erase it altogether. That's why so many owners talk about the famous magic carpet effect. You don't just drive over bumps. You almost forget they were there. But what's interesting is that part of the reason German cars feel harsh isn't actually the car. It's your brain. Our brains constantly adjust to whatever we experience regularly. Spend a few weeks or months in a softly suspended Citroën, and that peaceful floating ride starts to feel completely normal. Your senses recalibrate without you even noticing. Then, the moment I jump into a BMW, Audi, or Mercedes, my brain immediately picks up on the extra firmness. The road feedback hasn't suddenly become excessive. It just feels that way because I've become accustomed to Citroën's unique way of removing imperfections. And that's why many Citroën owners don't realize how spoiled they've become until they drive something else. Think of it this way. It's a lot like wearing noise-canceling headphones. If I've spent an hour in near silence, stepping outside suddenly makes ordinary conversations sound surprisingly loud. Nothing in the outside world has changed. My senses have simply adapted to the quiet. The same thing happens with suspension. After weeks or months of enjoying Citroën's pillow-like ride, climbing into a BMW or Audi can feel like someone has turned up the volume on the road. Every bump and crack seems more pronounced. My frame of reference has changed. I've become so accustomed to Citroen's incredible isolation that anything with more feedback now feels exaggerated. In other words, Citroen doesn't just change how the road feels, it changes what my brain considers normal. But here's something that often gets lost in these discussions. Comfort isn't free. Every suspension setup involves compromises. And that's exactly why I don't think either philosophy is objectively better. They're simply chasing different goals. Citroen's strengths are obvious the moment the road starts falling apart. Broken surfaces become far less tiring, and long journeys feel remarkably relaxed. I've spoken to owners who swear they arrive fresher and with less back pain after spending hours behind the wheel. That's because the car absorbs so much of the energy instead of sending it through the seats and steering wheel. But German engineers would argue that they're solving a different problem entirely. BMW, Mercedes, and Audi place a greater emphasis on control and precision. Their firmer setups provide sharper handling, more confidence during emergency maneuvers, and exceptional stability when traveling at Autobahn speeds. What I appreciate about German cars is that they constantly communicate with the driver. You feel what the tires are doing, you sense the grip levels, and the whole car feels tightly connected to the road. Meanwhile, Citroen almost does the opposite. It tries to shield me from all of that. And that's what makes these two philosophies so fascinating. They're both pursuing comfort, just from completely opposite directions. And perhaps that's why, once you've experienced the French way, going back isn't always easy. So, which philosophy is actually better? Honestly, neither. I think they're simply chasing different goals. Citroen has always prioritized passenger well-being and reducing fatigue, while German brands focus on driver confidence, precision, and performance. If I want to float over battered roads and arrive relaxed, I'd choose a Citroen. If I'm chasing sharp handling and high-speed stability, the Germans have the advantage. But here's the sad part for comfort lovers. The industry is gradually moving towards the German way of thinking. Bigger wheels, lower profile tires, and sportier suspension setups have become the norm. Meanwhile, Citroen's magical hydropneumatic systems disappeared because they were expensive and complex, making true magic carpet rides increasingly rare. And that brings us back to the original question. German cars don't suddenly become harsh after driving a Citroen. You've simply experienced two completely different definitions of comfort. And once you've lived with the French interpretation, it's hard not to miss that magic. So, what do you think? Do German cars feel harsh after driving a Citroen, or do you prefer that connected feeling? Let me know below. And if you're a human who secretly wishes roads came with a magic carpet mode, hit subscribe. For your next video, you can check out my pick on 7 Citroen cars you should never buy used, or see what YouTube thinks you'll enjoy next. Either way, I'll see you there.